An entire family vanished into thin air. The trail went cold for 11 years, until a single, chilling phone call led to a discovery that no one could have imagined. What happened to the Williams family will leave you speechless. Stay tuned, because this story is as unbelievable as it is tragic. In the sweltering summer of 1994, the Williams family was living a dream life. James Williams, a rising architect, had just earned acclaim for restoring Charleston's historic Franklin Library. His wife, Clara, a respected journalist for the Fort Banner Gazette, was known for her bold reporting on Black history and land rights across the South. Together, they were seen as a local power couple, educated, successful, deeply committed to their children and their community. Their daughter, 12-year-old Jasmine, was sharp-witted and talented at piano. 8-year-old Daniel was a bundle of energy, obsessed with the stars, bugs, and building anything mechanical with his dad. That February, the family had purchased their dream home, an old farmhouse on the outskirts of Fort Banner. Built by a Black family in the early 1900s, it sat on 5 quiet acres. To James and Clara, it wasn't just a house. It was a piece of history they were proud to restore. They spent months turning it into a home, planting gardens, refinishing floors, filling rooms with family photos. By July, life had found an easy rhythm. Jasmine attended piano lessons. Daniel explored the woods. James commuted to Charleston but always made it home for family dinners. Clara worked late into the night on an ambitious investigative series about the erosion of Black-owned farmland, a project that was already making waves. They were planning a big family cookout for the end of the month. The house buzzed with life, warmth, and plans for the future, until everything changed. Friday, July 16, 1994. It was an ordinary night. Dinner was simple: roasted chicken, okra, rice. Clara chatted with her sister on the phone. Jasmine practiced piano. Daniel and James tinkered with a model airplane. By 9 p.m., the family was settling in. Lights dimmed. Jasmine read in bed. Clara prepped notes. James locked up. It was the last normal night anyone would ever see. The next day, silence. No calls. No shows. No responses. Clara missed her sister's call. James skipped an important meeting. Jasmine missed her piano lesson. Daniel never met his cousins at the park. By Sunday, family rushed to the farmhouse, and what they found only deepened the mystery. The family car was in the driveway. Mail untouched. Freshly watered garden. No signs of struggle. Inside, dinner dishes still on the table. TV paused mid-movie. Clara's purse on the counter. Jasmine's journal on her bed. The Williams family was simply gone. It was a neighbor who noticed first, Mr. Leonard Grant, a retired teacher who lived 3 miles up the road. On Tuesday morning, July 19th, 3 days after that last normal Friday night, Mr. Grant was driving past the Williams farmhouse on his way to town when he noticed something odd. James's car, a deep green Ford Taurus, still sat in the driveway. Normally, James commuted to Charleston twice a week, leaving early in the mornings. At first, Mr. Grant thought little of it. Perhaps James had taken a few days off. But by Wednesday, the mailbox at the end of the long dirt drive was visibly stuffed with letters, magazines, and a few small packages. By Thursday night, something else caught his eye. The porch light, which had been left on for several nights, had finally burned out. The once cheerful glow was gone, leaving the front of the house in darkness. Still, no one came or went. No visitors, no cars, no lights moving from room to room in the evenings. By the weekend, the situation had begun to feel unsettling. Friends began calling. Jasmine missed another piano lesson. Daniel failed to show up for a Saturday playdate with his cousins. Clara hadn't checked in with her editor at the Gazette, a routine she never missed. By Sunday afternoon, Clara's sister, Sylvia, could no longer ignore the growing sense of dread. She made the hour-long drive from Columbia and arrived at the farmhouse shortly before dusk. There was no answer when she knocked. The front door was locked, but a spare key was hidden under a loose brick on the porch, a family habit. Sylvia let herself in. What she found only deepened the mystery. The house felt still. The kind of stillness that doesn't come from a family simply being out, but from something more ominous, more permanent. In the dining room, the table remained set from that last dinner. 4 plates with bits of uneaten chicken and okra. Glasses half full of sweet tea. A cloth napkin still folded neatly on Clara's seat. In the living room, the television sat on pause, a worn VHS copy of The Lion King, Jasmine and Daniel's favorite. The screen glowed faintly in the dim room, frozen mid-scene. Clara's purse and car keys lay undisturbed on the kitchen counter. James's wallet was on the hallway table, along with the day's unopened mail. Upstairs, the beds were unmade, as though the family had gone to sleep or left in a hurry. In Jasmine's room, her journal sat open on the desk. Daniel's beloved toy rockets were neatly lined on his dresser. There were no signs of struggle, no broken windows, no overturned furniture, no blood, no indication that anything violent had occurred. And yet the family was gone. By Monday morning, a missing persons report was filed with the Fort Banner police. Officers conducted their first official walkthrough of the farmhouse that afternoon. Every room told the same quiet story. Life interrupted, mid-flow. Fresh vegetables from the garden still sat in a colander by the sink. A loaf of bread Clara had baked the previous day remained, untouched, on the cooling rack. Daniel's little sneakers were by the front door, ready for the next day's adventures. There was no ransom note, no phone calls, no demands, no sign of forced entry. The locks were intact, the windows undisturbed. The garden hose lay coiled, still damp from watering. For the investigators, it was as though the Williams family had simply vanished into thin air, without a sound, without a witness, without a single clue. As weeks went by into months, the disappearance of the Williams family began to consume the small town of Fort Banner and beyond. Rumors spread like wildfire. At first, locals whispered about the possibility of an accident. Perhaps the family had gotten lost while hiking in the woods, or a tragic car crash had left them undiscovered somewhere remote. But with James's car still sitting in the driveway and no missing vehicle reports, that theory quickly lost steam. Then darker theories took hold. Some believed the family had been targeted. Clara's recent reporting had struck a nerve among certain land developers and corrupt county officials. In her series on black-owned land loss, Clara had exposed predatory deals and backroom schemes that cost black families their ancestral farms and their livelihoods. Had someone wanted to silence her? Friends close to the family mentioned that Clara had received threatening letters in the past. One anonymous note, sent 2 months before the family vanished, warned her to stop digging. Clara, known for her courage, had brushed it off, but now it seemed ominous. The local NAACP chapter demanded a deeper investigation into this angle, believing Clara's activism had made her, and her family, a target. Others pointed fingers elsewhere. A persistent rumor suggested that James himself might have had secrets. Some speculated that perhaps he had crossed paths with the wrong people in Charleston's business circles. Shady contractors or worse. It was true that James had recently won a major city contract, beating out several larger, more connected firms. Could jealousy or revenge have played a role? But no evidence ever emerged. James had no known debts, no legal troubles, no enemies anyone could name. Yet another theory was whispered in more hushed tones, that perhaps the Williams family had fled voluntarily. Maybe they had chosen to disappear, fearing retribution from those Clara had exposed, or wanting to start over elsewhere. After all, some argued, there had been no signs of struggle, no forced entry. Could the family have staged their own disappearance? But those who knew them best, family, friends, co-workers, rejected the idea outright. The Williamses were rooted in Fort Banner. Clara's career was thriving. James had just been promoted. The children were happy and well-loved. The farmhouse was their dream home, something they had worked years to afford and restore. And no parent would ever leave behind Daniel's favorite toys, Clara's purse and car keys, family photos, half-finished school projects. If the departure had been planned. As police dug deeper, one name kept surfacing: Albert Dwire. Dwire was a local contractor and handyman who had overseen much of the farmhouse renovation before the Williamses moved in. On paper, he had no criminal record, just a few minor disputes with clients over incomplete work. But around town, Dwire had a reputation for being odd. A loner in his late 50s, he lived alone in a cabin outside of town. He was known to frequent militia meetings and survivalist conventions, where he lectured about government conspiracies and the coming collapse of modern society. More than once, he had bragged about his expertise in building bunkers and safe rooms, skills that made him popular with a certain fringe clientele. It was Dwire who had installed new flooring and custom cabinetry in the Williams farmhouse. Dwire who had suggested certain security upgrades when James and Clara were renovating. Dwire who had spent weeks alone on the property prior to their move-in. When questioned by police, Dwire appeared calm, if somewhat amused. He denied knowing anything about the disappearance. Yes, he had done work on the house, but that was months before the family moved in. No, he hadn't been back since. He had receipts, invoices, and alibis for the days in question. Without hard evidence, and in the absence of any signs of foul play, authorities couldn't detain him. Still, Dwire remained on the radar of both local investigators and Clara's colleagues. One former Gazette editor was convinced he had something to do with the family's fate, but there was nothing they could prove. As summer turned to fall, then winter, the case grew colder. Search parties combed the surrounding woods. Helicopters scanned the region from the air. Rivers and ponds were dredged. National news picked up the story for a time, bringing in tips from across the country, none of which led anywhere. FBI profilers were brought in, though jurisdiction remained murky. Even psychics and self-styled detectives contacted the family, desperate to help. But still no clues. By early 1995, the official investigation had stalled. Public interest faded. New tragedies filled the headlines. The farmhouse sat empty, a stark, silent monument to a family gone without a trace. And in the absence of answers, all that remained was speculation. By the early 2000s, the Williams farmhouse had become a dark curiosity in Fort Banner. For years after the disappearance, no one would go near it. Family and friends had left memorials, candles, flowers, children's drawings, on the front porch, but as time passed, those too faded away. The once proud house began to decay. Weeds overtook the yard. The paint peeled. The front porch sagged. Many locals whispered that the place was cursed, that the land itself held some dark secret. Children dared one another to approach the overgrown path, but few had the nerve. Property records show that the house passed through bank hands several times, until finally being listed for auction in late 2004, priced far below market value. That's when Eric and Melanie Crawford saw it. A young couple from Colombia, the Crawfords were in their late 20s. Eric worked remotely as a web developer. Melanie, a former art teacher, had recently given birth to their first child, a baby girl named Harper. The couple had always dreamed of buying a historic home in the countryside, a place where they could raise a family and build a life away from the city's noise. When they came across the farmhouse listing, the price seemed too good to be true. The listing made no mention of the home's tragic history. When they toured it, the agent casually described it as a fixer-upper with great bones. To the Crawfords, the house was perfect. 5 acres of land, a beautiful old structure waiting to be restored. They bought it in February 2005. That spring, Eric and Melanie moved in with little Harper, full of plans for renovation. They stripped old wallpaper, cleaned the dusty hardwood floors, repainted walls. Eric set up a new home office upstairs. Melanie began clearing out the old garden, dreaming of growing vegetables. For the first few weeks, everything seemed fine, if a little eerie. The house was old, creaked and groaned at night. Melanie chalked it up to settling timbers. But then, strange things began to happen. It started with their dog, Baxter, a loyal black lab who had always been calm and well-trained. Baxter developed an intense fixation on the basement, particularly one corner near the far wall. He would growl, bark, and paw at the floorboards, sometimes for hours. His fur bristled, ears flattened, as though he sensed something unseen. No amount of coaxing or scolding could stop him. At times, he would stand stiff, tail low, staring into the darkness of that corner, trembling. Then came the sounds. The baby monitor, an ordinary model with an analog receiver, began picking up strange interference. At night, Melanie would hear bursts of static, followed by what sounded like faint crying. It wasn't Harper. When Melanie checked, the baby would be sound asleep in her crib. Sometimes, beneath the static, there seemed to be voices, too faint to make out just the impression of speech. Eric swapped out the monitors, tried different models, even tried running them on different outlets. But the sounds returned night after night. Still, they pressed on. The couple told themselves it was an old house, old wiring, old pipes. A place with history, yes, but nothing supernatural. Until one night in late April, a night that would change everything. Melanie had stayed up late working in the living room. Eric had gone to bed early with Harper. The house was quiet. Around 1 a.m., as she gathered her art supplies, Melanie heard it. A voice. Faint, hoarse, desperate, drifting up through the floor vent near her feet. "Please help us." She froze. The voice came again, rasping, barely above a whisper. "Please help." Shaken, Melanie ran upstairs to wake Eric. He dismissed it at first. The house creaked, old pipes groaned. But then, they both heard it. A low, anguished cry, rising up through the vents, through the floorboards. And from that moment on, nothing would be the same. Shaken by what she had heard through the floor vent, Melanie Crawford wasted no time. That very night, she and Eric called the local sheriff's office, urging them to come to the house. Though skeptical at first, attributing the strange sounds to old pipes or the couple's nerves, deputies agreed to send a unit the next morning. When officers arrived, Melanie insisted on showing them exactly where she had heard the voice. They began a careful sweep of the house. The basement, already a source of unease for the Crawfords, drew their attention. It was a sprawling, unfinished space, the floor uneven, with patches of cracked concrete and sections of exposed brick wall. Old storage shelves lined the back. Some areas still contained remnants of the Williams family's life, rusted garden tools, a broken rocking chair, a child's forgotten toy. But one section stood out, a corner near where Baxter had often barked furiously. The brickwork here was slightly different, newer than the surrounding walls. An officer tapped along the surface. A dull, hollow sound echoed back. They brought in a forensic team and structural engineer to assess. By late afternoon, it became clear that something was concealed behind that section of wall. Working carefully to avoid damage, they removed the bricks layer by layer. Behind them, they uncovered something unexpected. A false wall of reinforced steel, painted to match the basement interior. At first, there was no obvious way to open it, no handle, no lock. After hours of examination, a detective discovered an old hidden mechanism cleverly built into the floor trim, a pressure plate disguised among the tiles. When pressed in sequence, it triggered a latch. With a loud, metallic groan, the steel panel shifted, revealing a narrow passage descending via steep concrete stairs. At the bottom, 8 feet below ground, was a heavy steel door, rusted but solid. It had been sealed from the outside, bolted shut. The team worked urgently to unseal it. The air grew colder, the tension in the room electric. When the door finally creaked open, what they found inside horrified even the most seasoned investigators. The space was a concealed concrete bunker, approximately 12 feet long by 10 feet wide, with no windows, no ventilation beyond a crude air duct system. The walls were bare cement. A single, dim overhead light, wired separately from the house's grid, flickered weakly. In the far corners were soiled mattresses, rusted pails for waste, a battered wooden crate that had once held canned goods. But it was the figures in the shadows that brought the room to a chilling standstill. James Williams lay slumped against one wall, gaunt, skeletal, eyes sunken and hollow. His beard had grown wild, streaked with gray. His clothes hung from him like rags. Nearby, Clara Williams sat motionless on a mattress, her arms wrapped protectively around Jasmine, now 23 years old but barely recognizable. pale as a ghost, her frame thin and frail. Both women were silent, eyes wide, as if unable to comprehend that rescue had come. When officers called out, James stirred weakly, trying to speak, but his voice came out as a rasp. Clara blinked, trembling, unable to form words. Jasmine wept silently, clinging to her mother. They were alive, but only just. Then, in the far corner of the bunker, officers made a heartbreaking discovery. A small form, wrapped tenderly in a faded quilt, lay beneath a rough wooden shelf. Pinned just above it, on the bare concrete wall, was a child's drawing, yellowed with age. A family of 4, holding hands beneath a bright blue sky. It was Daniel. He had not survived. The medical examiner would later estimate that Daniel had passed within the first 2 years of captivity, likely from illness exacerbated by the harsh conditions, malnutrition, and lack of medical care. His mother and sister had kept his remains carefully wrapped, unwilling or unable to let him go. As officers gently carried the surviving family members out into the sunlight for the first time in 11 long years, witnesses reported that even the hardened deputies had tears in their eyes. The Williams family had vanished without a trace in 1994, and now, against all odds, they had been found beneath the very home they had cherished. In the days and weeks following their rescue, James and Clara Williams were rushed to a private medical facility under protective custody. Their physical condition was alarming. Both had lost nearly half their body weight, suffering from severe malnutrition, muscle atrophy, and untreated infections. Jasmine, now 23, remained in a fragile state, physically frail and emotionally withdrawn, her development frozen by years of captivity. For the first week, doctors focused on stabilizing their bodies. The family remained silent about what had happened, exhausted, overwhelmed, and in shock. But slowly, as their strength returned and familiar faces surrounded them, Clara's sister, James's brother, the truth began to emerge. And what they revealed was more chilling than anyone had imagined. It began with Albert Dwire. The local contractor, long suspected but never charged, had been far more dangerous than anyone realized. According to Clara, Dwire had first fixated on her during the months leading up to their move, after reading her articles in the Gazette. Her fierce, outspoken writing had drawn his attention, but where others saw courage, Dwire saw something else. Obsessed with survivalist ideology and extreme conspiracy theories, Dwire became convinced that a government collapse was imminent. In his twisted mind, Clara was a rare voice of truth, someone he believed needed to be saved. During renovations, Dwire had secretly built the hidden chamber, a concrete bunker beneath the farmhouse, complete with a false wall, steel-reinforced door, and crude ventilation system. He had also installed a hidden gas dispersal system, disguised as part of the home's heating vents. The Williams family had no idea. On the night of July 16, 1994, after the family had eaten dinner and begun settling in for the night, Dwire acted. He entered the basement and activated the gas, an odorless, sedative agent he had acquired through unknown means. Upstairs, the family began to grow drowsy. James later recalled feeling dizzy, unable to stay awake. Jasmine had collapsed while brushing her teeth. One by one, the family lost consciousness. When they awoke, it was in darkness, in the bunker below their own home. Their wrists had been bound initially, though later cut loose. Standing above them was Dwire, calm, composed, and disturbingly gentle. He told them the world had changed. According to Dwyer's elaborate lie, a massive government-engineered biological attack had been unleashed. Cities were in ruins. The air was poisoned. Survivors were either dead or mutated. He claimed that only his preparations, the hidden bunker, had saved the Williams family. They could not leave. The world outside was death. Only he could protect them now. For 11 long years, the family remained trapped in that chamber. Dwire rationed their food, canned goods and preserved supplies he brought down sporadically. He played fake radio broadcasts, which he had recorded himself, describing chaos and devastation in the world above. He told them no rescue would come. No family remained alive. The authorities had abandoned them. When Daniel fell ill during their 3rd year of captivity, Clara had begged Dwire for medical help, pleaded, screamed, offered anything. But Dwire refused. The child's fever worsened. Malnourished, weakened by the harsh conditions, Daniel passed away in his mother's arms. They kept his tiny body wrapped in a quilt, refusing to let Dwire remove him, the only act of defiance they could manage. Pinned above him, Jasmine had drawn a picture. A family of 4, hand in hand, under a bright sky, a memory of the life they had lost. In the years that followed, grief and despair nearly consumed them. At times, James admitted he had thought of ending it all, for himself and for Clara and Jasmine. But each time Clara resisted. "If there's a chance," she whispered to him in the dark. "We must try. We must believe." Clara began to devise a desperate plan. Using a piece of metal pried from an old shelving bracket, she began tapping Morse code against the bunker's walls. Faint, rhythmic patterns. She didn't know if anyone would hear. She didn't know if the sound could travel beyond the thick concrete. But still, night after night, she tapped. Prayers in the form of dots and dashes. Help! Alive! Help! Alive! And finally, in the spring of 2005, when the Crawfords moved in, Clara's persistence paid off. It is believed that through cracks in the aging vent system, faint vibrations reached the upper floors. And perhaps it was those vibrations that Melanie Crawford heard one night, carried through old air ducts and floorboards, transformed into a desperate voice. "Please help us." But here, just when it seemed the horror of the Williams family's captivity had finally been revealed, the story took an even darker, more disturbing turn. During the criminal investigation, agents from the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit were called in to assist the local sheriff's department. It was clear early on that Albert Dwire's crimes were not simply the product of one man's obsession. They were part of something deeper. When agents seized Dwire's home and property, they found a treasure trove of computer equipment, old floppy disks, notebooks, and boxes of printed documents. Among these was evidence that would widen the scope of the case far beyond Fort Banner. Dwire, it turned out, had been deeply involved in a shadowy online cult, one of the earliest known doomsday prepper networks on the infant internet of the mid-1990s. Through primitive forums and encrypted email servers, he and a handful of other fanatics exchanged conspiracy theories and radical survivalist ideology. They believed that modern civilization was doomed, not just from government corruption, but from spiritual decay. Their twisted mission? To preserve chosen families in secret underground bunkers, families they deemed morally pure, uncorrupted by modern society. These chosen few, they believed, would one day emerge from hiding to rebuild the world after its inevitable collapse. In one recovered email, dated just months after the Williams family vanished, Dwire chillingly wrote to a fellow cult member, "They are safe now, perfect family, untouched by the sickness of the outside world. Soon, I will find more." It wasn't just Clara he had targeted. It was the entire family he sought to preserve. The FBI's digital forensics team traced these communications to a small ring of similarly obsessed individuals, scattered across the southeastern United States. Many used false identities, but slowly the net began to close. Agents uncovered records indicating that Dwire had acquired at least 2 other properties across South Carolina, both outfitted with underground chambers similar to the one beneath the Williams farmhouse. The first property in rural Sumter County was found abandoned, the bunker empty, though furnished and fully operational. Evidence suggested that someone, perhaps another member of the cult, had cleared it out months earlier. The second property was more troubling. Located on the outskirts of an isolated farming town, the land was in a disputed ownership, purchased through shell companies and false names. When agents arrived, the house above had long been boarded up. But beneath it, they found signs of a larger, more sophisticated bunker system. This time, the search grew more complicated. The underground access points were rigged with traps, collapsed walls, sealed vents. It became clear that someone had gone to great lengths to conceal what lay below. And most disturbing of all, one of Dwire's closest online associates, known only by the screen name Covenant 7, was still missing. The FBI issued a warrant for a man they believed to be Dwire's co-conspirator. a former militia member with extensive survivalist training. Despite ongoing manhunts, Covenant 7 has never been found. To this day, parts of that second property remain under investigation. Is someone still down there? Were other families taken? Federal agents have not disclosed all details, citing national security concerns and the safety of potential victims. But one thing is certain, the twisted network Dwire belonged to was larger and more dangerous than anyone first believed. And the search for answers is far from over. In the months following their rescue, the Williams family faced a new and unfamiliar struggle, life beyond the bunker. Physically, James, Clara, and Jasmine recovered slowly with intensive medical care. They regained weight, underwent surgeries for neglected injuries, and received therapy to begin rebuilding atrophied muscles. But the emotional wounds ran far deeper. Jasmine, who had been just 12 when they were taken, and 23 when she emerged, suffered from profound PTSD, recurring night terrors, and what experts called arrested development. She had missed over a decade of formative life experiences, education, friendships, the normal milestones of adolescence. Worse still, she carried crippling survivor's guilt over the loss of her younger brother, Daniel. Therapists noted that for months, Jasmine refused to sleep in a separate room, often clinging to her mother through the night, terrified of being alone. With time, and with the support of trauma specialists, she began to reclaim her life, slowly venturing out in public, attending small gatherings. But even today, in her late 20s, Jasmine avoids media attention. She lives quietly, working from home, still haunted by the years underground, and the brother they could not save. James and Clara, though deeply scarred, found renewed purpose in the aftermath. While they now live under assumed names, relocated to another state under a federal witness protection program, Clara has emerged occasionally to speak at advocacy events. She has appeared anonymously or under pseudonyms at conferences on survivor trauma, long-term captivity, and the dangers of online radicalization. Her speeches, though rare, have moved audiences to tears, shining light on the unseen world of predatory online cults and how easily one man's obsession can spiral into unthinkable horror. James, though more private, has become involved behind the scenes with nonprofits dedicated to missing persons cases, helping families who face the same agonizing unknown that once consumed their own loved ones. And in Fort Banner, the shockwaves from the Williams case have never truly faded. Though 11 years have passed since the family was found, the once friendly, tight-knit community still struggles with the unsettling truth that Albert Dwire, a man they had hired, spoken to at the hardware store, waved at in passing, had committed one of the most horrifying crimes in modern state history. That beneath their very feet, an entire family had suffered, out of sight, unheard. To this day, the Williams farmhouse remains vacant. Despite efforts by realtors to renovate or repurpose the land, no one in Fort Banner has been willing to live there. The property has become something of a local legend, a grim reminder that sometimes evil hides in plain sight. And though Albert Dwire died in prison before standing full trial, and though one conspirator remains at large, questions still linger. How many others were involved? How many other chosen families were targeted? And what still lies undiscovered beneath abandoned properties across the state? The investigation remains open. The search for Covenant 7 continues, and the scars left by this haunting crime will never fully heal. If you found this story as shocking as we did, and want more in-depth explorations of chilling true cases, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. There are more stories waiting to be uncovered.